Good afternoon. I'm Jana Stotland, and on behalf of everyone at 9 to Y, I would like to thank Greenwich Entertainment and Concord for their generosity in sharing this important new film with our audiences today. We are extremely honored to have director James Erskine and executive producer and manager of the Billie Holiday Estate, Michele Smith, with us live to talk about the film, the process of making it, and what they hope it changes in our understanding of Billie Holiday. James and Michele will take questions in the second half of the program. Welcome, James Erskine and Michele Smith.
Hello.
Hi. How are you?
It feels like I'm only talking to you, Michele, and yet there's many more people listening.
I know. It's a little weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Normally these Q&As, there's a room full of people, or at least three people.
I know. But let's first off start and say thank you to 92Y for hosting us, and for all those who have virtually supported us or in real life supported us, but who have watched the film today. So
yeah, thank you, and thank you to our distributors, Greenwich, and to Concord, of course, Billie Holiday Estate for the support. And it's been a really complex and tough film to make, and hopefully to get right or nearly right. I guess everybody will have their own opinion, it seems incredibly timely. And we've actually finished the film a few months ago, and actually 9 months ago, I guess now, and it's extraordinary, when a film reaches its audience, that it has an impact related to the time in which it appears, not just when it's made.
True. I realized I don't think I'd seen the film since Telluride, which was September of last year. So it was nice to watch it again today through a different lens. So
did it make you feel different? I wondered. I didn't realize you hadn't seen it for so long.
Yes, in the sense of where we are in today's world with the pandemic and the social and civil unrest that is global, looking at the story in a different way. So I saw it in a different lens today as well. So
yeah, I didn't see. I saw it in like January, and then I didn't see it until September when we premiered the film in France at the Deauville Film Festival, and I was shocked at how different it felt. It's a strange, it's a strange thing to be the creator of a film and to look at all the intensity of the fabric, and then to sort of experience it when the world has changed so dramatically. So
yes,
I thought it was much more raw, actually.
And it's interesting because you are in the UK right now, and I'm in Los Angeles, so we're miles apart.
Not my choice.
Not my choice. That's true. But wonderful film. Why don't we start with you telling us how it came about, the making of this film?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I just wanted to say one thing before we talked about that, actually, and I'd say that this film actually didn't begin 2 years ago or 3 years ago. This film began in the 1960s. It began when Linda Limpnack Keel set out to tell her story of Billie Holiday, and with her own reasons for doing that. And she was trying to tell a biography, and obviously the film explores that. But one of the sort of remarkable things I feel about this process is, although it was unintentional, by the end of it all, I feel that we really completed Linda's journey, that we actually were able to take her mission from the 1960s and her desire to reappraise Billie Holiday and to look at her from a feminist perspective, and to bring those voices that spend a lot of time talking about Billie Holiday, that are lost to us now, those eyewitnesses, and it feels like a really nourishing thing for the soul that the film completes somebody else's journey who didn't get to do it themselves. And that's partly due to Linda's family, who really were incredible in supporting the project after being initially very, very wary. But so I feel they said to me when they saw the film that they were great. They felt a sense of peace that Linda's journey had been completed. And I'm that's one of the most rewarding things I can take from that.
Yes.
But I guess for me it began. I mean, I've sort of I've made a lot of films actually about athletes. Recently I've made films about artists. I made dramatic films. in the past, but in the last few years, I've made films about athletes, and what connects them is that they're all, in my mind, pioneers or geniuses. And actually, it was Barry, who was one of the producers of the movie, Barry Clark Ewers, who sort of set me on the train for making this film. He'd come to me in around 2016 and said, you know, I want to develop some music films with you. And so we tried a few ideas which didn't work out, a film about the Ramones, which didn't quite happen, and a film about Ronnie Wood. So very different areas. And they were his ideas he'd come to me with. And then he said, well, is there one film about a musician that you really want to make? And I said, well, you know, I really want to make a film about Billie Holiday, actually. Not just on her own terms, but because I've heard about this extraordinary story of this journalist, Linda Lipnack-Keele, who had set off to try and tell her story. You know, I think Billie's story is fascinating and deserves reappraisal, but I think that there's this possible lens, which is these tapes, if they exist, that could tell this story. And there'd been references in biographies. Donald Clark's biography, and a writer called Julia Blackburn had access to some of the transcripts. But it just seemed to me that if he went off and he could get the access to those tapes, that we might have a fabric to make a film that felt very current and very different. You know, I mean, I was very interested in the idea that the film would be a detective story from the beginning, that we would be encountering people in the way that the author, maybe this is because I'm a filmmaker and I'm interested in process, you know, and like, you know, I guess there's a sense of ego in that, you know, a journalist wants to read story about journalists, I guess, you know, I mean, I get, you know, lawyers like to go and see movies about lawyers, I'm sure. Yeah, so I was interested in this sort of double lens, and the idea that it would create a portrait of Billie that was more of a mosaic and less about definite truth, you know, that by encountering people, laying people out as individual characters that you met, would somehow give a more faithful portrayal of Billie. I don't know if it's a truthful portrayal. I don't know what the truth is, you know, but I think, you know, by putting every individual's truth side by side, that you could in some way create a more realistic portrait into Billie's world as well. Yeah. The world that we are not, you know, we're quite removed from, you know. So
it's interesting that you talk about the portrayal and what is the truth. I think from my perspective, or the estate perspective, it's the first time that her voice has been heard, or we get a glimpse of who she is that is not the telling of other people in the sense of the fictitious telling or people writing about third hand. We get to hear the voices of those who walked and lived with her. We also see her in a light that is more recognizable to what her truth was. We look at it in the era of which she lived. So here she was as a musician who had to live through some of the issues that we didn't really think about once we hear her music on the radio or on vinyl or however we listen to it. So what I love about the film is that we get to see her in a different light that's more honest than maybe some of the other stories that we've heard about her.
Yeah, I mean, for me with it, I mean, obviously you and I work closely on the editorial as well as other people. So, you know, it was really a sort of team effort to try and work out, you know, trying to sift through this material and sort of work out what were the right portraits to put into it, or the right eyewitness testimonies. You know, slightly we benefit from the fact that we found the material and we're sort of putting it together, you know, as a team rather than setting out. But we also benefit, and I think this is one of the reasons why Linda didn't complete her journey, was she was really wanting to capture Billie's voice, you know, and capture the essence of this incredible artist. And yet, as the writer of a book, you know, she doesn't have access to the great things that we have, which is Billie singing, you know, and Billie performing, you know. And I think that for me was actually the starting point, you know. Knowledge of the tapes was great, and that we were going to build a structure using the tapes, but actually where I actually started editorially was to treat it as a musical, you know. I knew that there wasn't a lot of reliable testimony of Billie, but I knew the really reliable testimony is what she put on record and on the record on film, you know. And so when we started out, we sort of trawled and to find out what film performances existed. And I sat there in the editing room with Avi, my editor, and we laid it out from beginning to end as a like we would a musical, you know, said, okay, we're going to have this, and then we put the story into the music rather than putting the music into the story, which was important to me because the film's called Billie. Billie was at her best singing. We even talk about that in the film. You know, her friends talk about how the fact, you know, she's saying, you know, she's not necessarily the most articulate and she's certainly not very educated, and her ability to write prose or be political, you know, what she's really great at is capturing the essence of message and song. And we wanted to use that at the heart of it. And also, so you know, whatever you felt about the narrative of the film, you were actually going to get an evening with one of the greatest artists of all time, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Ideally in a big darkened cinema, you know, obviously that's not always the case these days, but at least in your home cinema.
Why don't we talk about the beautiful colorization? So how did that come about? I mean, to see her in color where she pops off the screen when we see her mostly in black and white historically.
Yeah. I mean, there is no, at least I'm aware of, there's no color footage, and we did some extensive searches of that. There are some color stills of Billie Holiday that exist, a few, but we really felt that, I really felt from the beginning that we wanted Billie to feel very present day. The theme she talks about and sings about are very present day. The relevance of the story is very present day, and we didn't want it to just be ghettoized, I would say, in the technology of the past. You know, black and white technology existed, and certain photographers used black and white film as an artistic choice, you know, particularly in her later life when color was more prevalent. But in the earlier days, you know, she lived in this vibrant world of color. She was a vibrant and colorful person. You know, she cared about what she wore. She wasn't, you know, and I really wanted to sort of that the film could express that. And where I got lucky on that was we sort of did some searching around. There's been lots of bad versions of colorization in the past. Obviously, Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old was a good sort of recent version. And I came across this amazing artist called Marina Amaral, who did this extraordinary. I mean, I found her, she had this book, and I can't make this work on the video, but you know, this is Lewis Powell. I saw this picture and I thought this picture was like in the 1970s. And actually this is one of the co-conspirators in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And these other extraordinary sort of, this is her work on, you know, on Karl Marx, you know, not so popular in most of America these days, but you know, what else have we got here? Mark Twain, you know, it's hard to see it on a webcam.
Right. No, we can see it. We can see it.
Really arresting work. So I contacted her and said, you know, are you interested in helping me with this film? And you know, here's Albert Einstein, you know, and you know, these are photos that are, so I just knew that she cared passionately about the history and getting everything sort of right, you know, and making the right decisions. So we then began a very laborious and expensive process where she would paint a single frame that I sent her, be it obviously for photos, it's obviously a single frame, but film footage. She would take a single frame and paint it. The wide shot she'd paint, the close up she'd paint, just one frame, and then that would be sent to India to a lab in Mumbai called Red Chilies, who I arrived in a film with before, who are brilliant, but the cost of labor is considerably cheaper, and they have to draw like 600 or 700 shapes per frame of image.
Oh, wow.
To put the colors into, and then each frame they have to sort of move that. Some of that's done by AI, but not very much. A lot of it's done by hand. And I think there's a little video which is worth showing, which sort of illustrates the process. I don't know if the guys, yeah, here we go. So here's a black and white of Billie singing Now or Never. And then we would freeze that frame, and then Marina would basically select all the colors, and then the guys in India would make the shapes. We'd then colorize the image, and then according to that one image, and then they would rescan the original light, which is why when you see in the film, you see these amazing earrings that dangle and you see the light in them. This actual piece of footage, the later piece of footage is lower resolution, so it's harder to get it right. The early piece of footage was from we found a 35mm print that had never been watched of that film in the basement of the British Film Institute in London. It was just marked Universal Music 1950. So, you know, it was kind of like nobody opened the tin for 70 years. So, yeah, that was extraordinary. And it's amazing that those guys were able to really to pull off what we did. But, you know, we still wanted to make sure there was plenty of black and white in there. You know, we weren't trying to present an inauthentic world. But I mean, some of the footage, even as early as, you know, there's 1930s footage with Artie Shaw, you know, that color footage was color footage at the time. You know, color film was available at in the late 1930s.
Well, I think Marina's work is amazing. And why don't you talk about how she chose some of the colors? I know I asked you, like, how did the dress get to be green, and you went back into kind of a historical reference on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Marina, I can't really speak for Marina and her skills to laud them highly, but and her process, which is her own process, which, you know, is the things that she does. But she would do the research. She would look at photos from the period. She'd look at fabrics at the period. She'd try and build up a fabric layer and a color layer. You know, she'd look at where there were color photos of Billie and just try and ultimately make an artistic choice. You know, what would look good in this photo? What would be different from the photos that we'd seen before? What would be an authentic color in that period or in that lighting setup? And, you know, what would show off Billie as her finest, you know, at times. I think that was really important. You know, we want to show, like, to me, like Billie Holiday, when you see her like this, she's just like, she's a princess, she's a goddess, she's a beautiful, powerful woman. And that was really important to me, that the film started off presenting her, you know, in a really, as a really powerful, beautiful woman, and tried to immediately sort of get rid of the images of the more negative images from her late career. Obviously, in the film, we go through that and go on that journey, but I wanted people to understand the beautiful flower that was crushed by everything around her, not just see the crushed flower and just examine that.
Well, I know when I first saw the colorized version, the very first time, I left saying, I want that color of lipstick that Marina had given her. It was this beautiful lush burgundy. And I thought, wow, Billie Holiday needs her own makeup campaign, because the colors, when you see her alive. So I really was impressed with seeing how beautiful Billie Holiday was in life, but also through the colorization of this film. So,
well, again, you and I share stills through it to get the right tones as well. That was something that we worked on, you know.
And one thing I want to share also through this whole process, and working very closely with Sophia Daly, who's the head of film and television for Concord, and just really appreciating the fact that we could have very open and honest dialogue about everything in this film, in the sense of who Billie is and was, race relations, really her struggle, what it was like to live at that time for her, how she's been depicted in the press over the years, and what through the film, when we see that you can't just take her addiction and put it into an isolated point, how you have to look at her whole life story. And I really appreciated through this whole process, those conversations that we had to paint a realistic picture of where she came from.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I'm a British guy from the north of England. You know, I can study Billie Holiday as well, but I think it's really important that for me, the film obviously addresses race at a deep level, you know, and Billie's struggle because of the color of her skin. But I think one of the other things, and it was really important with working with you and working with Cheyenne and Victoria, who produced the film with me in London, was actually that we understand, and because of what Linda's mission was, that we understood that gender suppression was also at the heart of it. So it's sometimes hard to forget, but, you know, in the 1930s or 40s, you know, Billie was being oppressed, you know, because of the color of her skin, but also heavily because of her gender, you know, and those two things combined into, you know, giving her very little freedom to express herself, or to be permitted to be express herself, you know. And I think it was really important. And, you know, you guys as the estate, I was kind of like, oh God, gotta have the estate on board. When I started this process, they're going to start, you know, wanting me to sort of portray this in a certain way. But, you know, you know, actually, you guys, nobody ever said, don't say this, don't say that, you know. And I never felt that. In fact, you guys pushed me to keep it raw, you know. and real.
Well, I think in being the estate and also someone who is protective of the legacies of the artists that we oversee, and that we are not tasked, that we have the honor of working with. I think you have to look at what is the truth of their story. A lot of us just know them through their music. We don't know the stories behind their story. With Billie Holiday, a lot of people know about the addictions. A lot of people know about her story, but do we actually know who she is? We know a lot of times when people are singing, but we don't know who they actually are. So this was the first time I think there was a lens to tell her story from a perspective of the child abuse and the rapes when she was younger to who she became as an adult, and not to sugarcoat her life and not to change it in any way, because Billie Holiday is Billie Holiday. She is who she is. However, I don't think anyone looked at the story from the aspect of being hounded by the FBI for 20 years because she sang Strange Fruit, to looking at what were the factors that played into who she is and was. And to die at 44, so young, there are a lot of factors in that people don't really acknowledge or talk about. And I know we have a question from Rose on YouTube, who is asking more about her relationship with her mother. And I know we don't talk about that in the film, but we touch on it. And there's more about her relationship with her mother if you read like Lady Sings the Blues. But the fact that, here is a woman who is an icon, a legendary singer, who had these relationships with different people that meant a lot to her. In the film, you show that all she wanted to do is be loved, love and be loved. She wanted children. You see it when she's with her godson or her godchildren. You see a different aspect of Billie Holiday. And I think from an estate perspective, that is something that we wanted to keep very true, as well as showcase her as the musician and the vocalist, and why she is a legend and why she's an icon today. So
yeah. I mean, I can talk a little bit about we were very focused on her adult life. I think obviously her mother was a big part, and one can psychoanalyze that relationship. But I think where we felt the freshness was, and the truth within the eyewitness accounts, was actually more in her adulthood and in her later career, and from her friends. And I just didn't want to just get stuck in the maternal relationship, because I think, there's a lot more going on here. You've got to, we only had 90 minutes, it's not that we chose specifically to say, oh, we have less of the mother. That's just, the process is very organic. We have long sections about childhood, and then we whittle them down and we work our way and try and find the rhythm to keep you alive, and you have enough of a sense of her mother to understand the impact, I think, that she has. And, her mother, there's lots of stuff about her mother running whorehouses or turning tricks. I didn't want to overemphasize that element of the story. Of course, we hit it quite hard with Billie's own life, but it's like, I didn't want to, it's that thing of really trying to present her with a full bloom and full possibility, rather than saying she didn't, look at all the forces. When you talk about the Jimmy Fletcher tape, I assume, which is Jimmy Fletcher is the Bureau of Narcotics agent, who's the only black Bureau of Narcotics agent at that period of time, and that interview is extraordinary. As far as I'm aware, that's never been, we never spoke to anybody else apart from Linda, and that's one of the great finds of the tapes. And to me, it's extraordinary, this sort of the complicity of the world. When he talks about knowing John Levy, who becomes Billie's sort of second common law husband, and Billie doesn't meet this guy until the late 1940s, and yet the agent already has him as an informant from the 1934, and you get this kind of like really claustrophobic sense of the world in which she keeps trying to escape, and then she ends up in this world of the nightclubs and music promotion and the music industry, which is very small and oppressive, and becomes penetrated and becomes a target, within a target for, ultimately the white supremacist forces of government. It's the truth of it. Why? Because it has lots of talented, multiracial you know, all races and ethnicities are represented. People do drugs, yeah, whatever. They live a little bit more freely. They become a target because they're sort of easy in a way, you know, they're an easy target, you know, rather than dealing with real problems.
Well, you touched on Linda and the Jimmy Fletcher tape, which is extraordinary. But do you know or have an idea? And Carol Robert 45 from YouTube is asking if there's any insight into how Linda prepared for her interviews. Do you have any information about that, or?
Yes, yeah, I do actually. And so, I mean, you know, some of this came from her family, but some of it was in her notes. And I mean, when you listen to the tapes, I mean, when you see the film, of course you can see it, but when you listen to the tapes, you realize what a great interviewer Linda is. And she's able to disarm people and win their trust, you know, in all sorts of environments, and joke with them. And I think she prepared by having really thorough research. She really worked hard to try and understand, see what else had been written there. I mean, it's interesting you talk about Lady Sings the Blues, because one of Linda's obsessions was about correcting what she felt were untruths published for sensational reasons in Lady Sings the Blues. You know, she wanted to hear it from other people's perspective, and not just, you know, which is always an interesting thing if you've got an autobiography, is, you know, an autobiography is a way of telling your version of the events. It's not necessarily the way of getting closer to the truth. So I think that's kind of interesting. But also, one of the interesting things I think about Linda that I discovered on the way was that she trained as an actress, and she quite wanted to be an actress. And you have that sense of somebody who was able to inhabit different characters in the room with different people. So yeah, I think she.
Yeah. Also, so when she had died, Linda, Vanessa on YouTube wants to know, how were the audio tapes discovered by Linda's family? I mean, her family knew that she was doing these recordings, so it was, to me, it's not a sense of being discovered. It's, you know.
Yeah, the tapes were came into the possession of her sister Myra, who's in the film, when Linda passed away, you know, and then Linda sold them on to a collector in the late 1980s, and he still owns the tapes. So he licensed the tapes to us. He let certain biographers have access to those tapes, but you know, there wasn't very much about Linda. It wasn't the most straightforward journey to find out where they were. I mean, it's a funny one for me to talk about, because it was Barry that did the work there, and I just got on the phone calls. But yeah, that's you know, we're grateful that they were preserved. You know, in some respects, we've also done a lot of preservation work. The tapes were still audio cassettes when they came to us. You know, 50-year-old audio cassettes don't have a lot of reliability, you know, and many of them were poorly recorded. So we went through a several-step process with that, where first of all, we digitized them in a great facility in Chelsea, in New York, and they did their passes. They just literally got the material in, and some of the tapes broke as they came in, and those guys were really brilliant at fixing them and doing technical wizardry that's beyond my imagination. And then we took them back to London, but even some of them were still almost indecipherable, you know, when we're listening to them, and there was 4 of us listening to them, and you know, we can't quite work out the words, or sometimes there's, you know, they're recorded in nightclubs and there's music all over them. So then we hired this kid Tom in Belgium, who's a genius. I don't know what he does, but he creates visual maps of sound, and he was able to cut out all the bad sound. And it's a little bit like being an archaeologist, and you know that there's something in there, and this guy goes out and digs and digs and digs and cleans it up, and then, you know, eventually you find this kind of material, and each time you polish it, it gets shinier and shinier and shinier. And that was, you know, it was a very, it's a very expensive process, and it took a long time. But, you know, I'm really glad that we did, because the essence of those voices, you know, some documentaries might have approached things where they take voices and they put them together to try and prove a point. You know, again, with this eyewitness thing, what struck me was we were capturing lost voices. I mean, where else do you hear of a pimp from the 1920s in Baltimore, for example, or a Bureau of Narcotics agent speaking verbatim to you? You know, they're just so full of atmosphere. So. Yeah.
Yes. I just think that it's just so fascinating to see how Linda created this, well, went about her journey to be a fan of Billie's, to find all of these people who were willing to speak about Billie Holiday, to compile the interviews, to now, like you said, it's full circle, feeling like her journey has been completed through the film and this telling of her story. So I think it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the reaction as well. I mean, the film obviously has not been released yet in America. This is the sort of start of that journey in many ways. But, we released the film in France, I think, already, where the reception was tremendous and people were like, really moved by the film, I think, which is what we hoped for. We know every thread in this film isn't tied up in a neat bow, but that's part of the purpose of it. That was sort of intentional, that it's all about flavors and smells and how do you feel at the end of the film, so that was able to communicate to a French audience, that it's done well in Switzerland, it's been out in Norway, the UK, there's been a really solid reception, shows to me the power of that material, but most of all the power of Billie Holiday, that actually new audiences are discovering pretty tough critics here, actually, I have to say, are actually just being like, she is so amazing that, it's a joy to sort of be back in her company. And, that to me is important because, with performers, they can often get lost in time. And Billie was a real performer. She wasn't really a recording artist. So they were obviously largely what we have is singles and albums. Her real art and her real mastery was the live performance. Everybody, all her peers talk about this, and she did concert after concert, night after night, and people say she was the greatest of all time. And I think, that's the sort of legacy that we really wanted to bring together, that the performances, we've captured some of them and put them together. So rather than just it sort of being a memory or talked about thing.
Yeah. And I think that not to make a shameless plug, but the soundtrack to the film that Verve You and Me has put together, just, I think, showcases the essence of the performance and the tracks, not only in the film, but who she is vocally. I mean, you see in the film that she just wanted to sing. She found her power and her sense of peace when she sang. And I think it's showcased throughout the film, I think, through her musical performance. And it's the fact that that's why she is a legend, is how she performed and why she performed.
Yeah, but it's more
quality.
It's more than that, though, isn't it? Because I think, you see it with the Strange Fruit performance, the Strange Fruit performance. And it's interesting, having a lot of radio interviews, and almost always on the radio interview, they'll play the 1939 original Commodore recording of Billie's Strange Fruit. But if you compare that to that 1959 performance, like, they're really day and night. The difference of seeing ladies sing that song and also 20 years more lived experience, 20 years more pain is really arresting. It's really, the first version is powerful enough, but then you hear the later version, you see her, you're just kind of like,
but she's, and I agree with you, but she's had to go through that evolution of, in 39, when she first performed it at Cafe Society, do I perform this song? Do I get out there? The wrestling with herself, knowing how important this song is, how her father had died without getting medical treatment and how that played into her performance, to now within that 20-year span between 39 and 59, when she dies, the amount that she had gone through. And the amount that America had gone through too in that time.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that her 1939 performance is weaker. I'm just saying she's comparing the difference of 20 years.
Oh, yeah. I'm not taking it that way.
There's a sort of like, in the early versions, this sort of sense of I can't quite believe I'm singing it. Whereas in the later version, you just see the pain. It's almost erupting through her whole body. And maybe she sang it like that live, but that's the only film performance we have, and that's the difference between sort of the recording and the film. Obviously, she's a fantastic recording artist as well, and that's a huge part of her legacy and what we do have. But the film exists to try and create her in all dimensions.
Right, and as when you read about Billie Holiday through time, all the articles will say she left a bit of herself in the telling of Strange Fruit every time she sang it. So I think over time you do see the toll that it took on her, because she understood really what was going on in America at that time, to this day, and why that song was so important, and how she did sacrifice a lot to sing that song. And she had to make that conscious choice to sing that song in every.
Yeah, well, also she sang it every night. I mean, that's the other thing to forget about, you know. And I don't think it really even struck me until I finished the film, was that, you know, and watched it back. You know, it wasn't that she recorded it in 1935 and she performed it in Cafe Society in 1939 and 1940. She was singing it every single night. You know, she was, you know, there's real activism in that. You know, there's real bravery, especially when they've already harassed you. You know, there's police watching you. You know, it's banned in. I mean, it was banned in the UK. The BBC banned that song. You know.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, BBC banned it.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy, eh?
Yeah.
You know.
But you know, like, let's go back to let's look at who Billie Holiday is. And a lot of people say to me, "Well, Michele, you oversee the estate of Billie Holiday. I can't believe." You know, the film, it's very raw. It talks about her. Isn't your job to protect her? And I think the job is, yes, to protect her, but it's not to hide the truth of who she is and was. And when we look at who she is and was, the first thing that stands out is she was an activist. The fact that she sang Strange Fruit every night for 20 years, when it had a cost that was, she paid a cost to sing this song. There, you know, that is civil and social activism. You know, in the film, we find out she's bisexual. She would probably be at Pride Parade, you know, supporting the LGBTQ community. You know, with Mister, her dog, she would be part of, you know, animal rights. So when we look at who she is as a person, a lot of things she believed in are still important issues today in 2020. And she passed.
The fur coats might be a bit of an issue, but
sorry,
the fur coats might be a bit of an issue with that.
But I just think it's phenomenal to see how really she was ahead of her time in a lot of ways. And
but she's ahead of the time in what she sings as well, you know. I mean,
correct.
when she's singing Now or Never at the beginning of the movie, you know, she's clearly singing about sex. She's not singing about love, you know. She's singing about race. She's singing about spousal violence and betrayal. You know, if the themes that she sings are not themes that are sung about in that era. You know, the themes that are sung about now, and they would expect artists to be addressing now. And I think that's what makes her so resonant, you know, and by being resonant to be relevant, you know. And I think it's great, you know, your job is not to protect her, your job is to preserve her, the good and the bad, you know.
Yes. And just to see how there is a new generation that is discovering her. And I think that is incredible. And that's what we'd like to see and hear, because you know, that's why she is an icon. That's why her legend, her story has to be told. Because if we do not learn from the past, we can repeat. So.
Well, I think the film tells you that already, you know.
It does. It does.
You know, we're like, God, does nothing change, you know? Joe Jones tells us that, you know.
Yeah.
Was there
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Should we answer some of the questions? I don't know.
I think so. We touched on some.
Yeah, we have touched on some. Does Billie have any surviving family members?
Well, she was an only child. No, she did not have children herself. And I don't know about the rest of her family. She had the one cousin, but I cannot speak to that.
Yeah, well, she was kind of pushed out of her family, you know. So pushed out for having an illegitimate daughter, right?
Then here's, sorry?
The state of Linda's biography, how much was, this is from Nash on YouTube, what's the status of the written portion of Linda's biography? How much she was able to complete prior to her death? I mean, from what I've seen, there's no complete manuscript. There's lots of chapters. There's lots of versions of chapters. There's lots of versions of prologues. I haven't seen anything that I would say is a complete book top to tail. But she did a lot of work, you know. I think she just, and interestingly, her mission in when you see the manuscript, or when you've seen the manuscript like I have, she set out that she was going to write more of a traditional biography, and then she realized that the only real way to do this, which speaks to the film, is that she wanted to lay out the voices that she met. So we didn't see the manuscript until a ways into it, but it was interesting to see that her process was almost like a documentarian, that she really wanted that she wanted people to speak for themselves, even if they were speaking in an inconsistent way. And then at the end of each chapter, she would write, sometimes tens of thousands of words, with her view and cross-referencing and sort of making observations. And, some of it's fascinating, some of it needed a heavy edit, but, there's definitely a great book in there somewhere,
Right. Let's see. Here's a question from Amy on YouTube. It's really about Linda's family, if they've seen the film, how they feel about it.
Linda's family, Myra and Jerry, and their children, Doug and Dave, were really fantastic in helping us through this process. I remember very early on, but initially they were quite difficult to get hold of, and they didn't really want to talk about Linda. They hadn't talked about her publicly. And again, Barry, the ever resourceful Barry, managed to track them down via friends and colleagues of Myra's, and we managed to have a conversation. And we met for lunch in New York, and I talked about the project and what we were trying to do, and they sort of needed some persuasion to participate. But as you can see, Myra's a wonderful speaker, and what we didn't know when we met them was just how close those two were as sisters. They were really best friends, and the family had been intimately involved in the creation of their biography. I think it's not in the film, but I think Myra would type up the transcripts, herself. Her mother and Myra would do it, and they would really participate in that process. So in the way of them, and then when they saw the film, they said, I showed them the film much earlier this year, and they actually sort of did it as a family surprise, Doug and Dave, where they had a surprise for Myra and Jerry, who were taken to a cinema and shown the film with a bunch of their nearest and dearest, which was probably quite terrifying. But yeah, I think they were very moved by what they saw. They felt that we'd done Linda justice, and that but most of all, I think they felt, and I think this was quite important to them, that they sort of felt that we'd done Billie justice. And whilst Linda's a strand in the film and her voice is present, what's important, the film is called Billie. Billie's story is, Billie is one of the greatest artists of all time in the medium that she works in. Her suffering is suffering upon suffering upon suffering, and her story is the story that's really resonant to today, and those were the things you wanted to be together. And we felt the best way to honor Linda's contribution was to embrace her telling of Billie's life. But the film was always called Billie for a reason.
Here's a question from, let's see, Joanne at YouTube. She wants to know about the estate. So the estate of Billie Holiday is Concord is the estate of Billie Holiday, and the estate was acquired from Louis McKay's estate. So there was a question on, is Louis McKay's family still basically her estate? No, the estate of Billie Holiday is with Concord. So here's another question about the release of the film. So in the United States, it comes out on December 4th. It came out in, as you said before, in France and the UK, but it comes out here on December 4th.
Yeah, and it comes out obviously the pandemic has had some impact on the film. The film was due to come out actually the first week in June of this year in the US, the 12th of June actually, which was, I don't know if you want to call it irony, but it was certainly, it was a moment when there's obviously a great amount of civil unrest following George Floyd's killing and the killing of George Floyd. So, maybe that would have been a strange time anyway for it to come out. But actually, the pandemic has meant obviously that cinemas are closed in lots of places. So we are coming out in theaters. So you call it theaters there. I call it cinemas here.
Yes.
Prove I'm really English. the film is coming out in theaters on December the 4th, where there are right across the North America, and then it will also be available digitally, where you can't see it in theaters. And then it's going to be distributed all across Europe. It opens in Germany on Christmas Eve, and opened in Finland yesterday. Who knew Finland? So we're really, all with independent distributors, all with people that are approaching film from the love of film, and that's really heartening. It's played in Israel, it's played Australia, Billie's Thailand. Actually, it opened in theaters in Thailand.
In Thailand,
a film opened in theaters in Thailand. But we're fighting against the pandemic, but it seems to be touching a nerve.
That's awesome. Anything else you think people should know about the film, or you think people should know about the estate or Billie? I think
I think wow. I mean, it's hard to say. I've been so submerged in it for so long. I think I would urge people to go out and listen to as much as Billie Holiday as they can. You don't have to go to musty old record shops and get vinyl, although it's pretty good getting the vinyl. That's what I'd prefer to do. Obviously from your home, you can listen to her voice and listen to the way it changes, and consider her, and also consider her against other artists, her peers like Ella Fitzgerald, and make your own opinion about where she sits. I mean, it's interesting with Billie's voice. Somebody asked a question, Lisa on YouTube asked about, did she ever have formal singing lessons? And I can't really answer that. I probably ought to know that off the top of my head, but
so should I. But my understanding is no. My understanding is she did not have formal.
She taught herself to sing, and also she taught herself to, many singers. If you think of great singers, Whitney Houston, Aretha Franklin, people come up through the church. One of the distinct things about Billie is that's not what she comes to, although she goes to church, she learns to sing in brothels, she is also learning to sing at the very beginning. It's very transactional in the sense that she's singing to live. She's singing to get money, to get food. It's one of the better living choices at that point. She's not singing for the divine presence of the creator or in a nice, secure sort of quasi family environment. She's got to sing, and I think that edginess comes through, and that need to also be, she talks in the, she talks and other people talk about, singing like a musical instrument. And I think that's right. She understands that the music is not just about the words, it's about reaching people's hearts as well as their heads. So.
But she also says in the film that she didn't know if she could make a living at it. Like singing is the one thing she wanted to do. It's the only thing she wanted to do, and to realize that she could make a good living doing what she loved to do. I think that's a blessing in and of itself. How many people get to do what they love to do every day? So
and how many people are strong enough to fight for it when they tell her not to do it? Maybe she is their only way of making a living. But the other thing. I've got asked loads of questions, obviously, over the last few months. And somebody asked me about, she gets to be wealthy at a period of time, and even Joe Jones refers to it, the fur coats and the Cadillacs. Of course, she's really great. She's so great that in her day she can command more money than anybody else on 42nd Street. That she's the best. That she deserves this power, and she does it all on her own in lots of ways, and she continues to do it on her own, be isolated, and I think that's really important to remember with Billie.
I think from an estate perspective, what's important to me is that her music shines through, her singing shines through, her performance, that it's really about who she is her performance and her songs. But I think more so too, the perspective that the film brings light to is that she was a fighter, she was a survivor, even though she had a lot of negative things happen in life, she was an overcomer. So the narrative to me changes when people would first talk about Billie Holiday. As I said earlier, they would talk about the addictions, and they would talk about a lot of the negative things, but they wouldn't see her in the light of a fighter or a survivor or an activist. And I think that is walking away from this film, you see her in a different light.
Yeah, the other thing which is really important to me to put in, is that she is having pleasure. Actually, there's the scene where we have her, in the nightclubs and being very sexually liberated and taking the drugs she wants to take and having a good time. I think that's that. It's not all kind of minor notes. She's willing to. She's determined to live in the moment and take what she can. And I think it's really good to show that people, she dies sadly and she dies young, but her life was not one long diminuendo. It was lots of light and lots of power and lots of just grabbing life, as best she could. And I think that's important too.
But I also appreciate you telling that side of the story where, how many of us, if we get down to the brass tacks of it, could be hounded by the FBI like that for 20 years through all of our human strengths and our failures and survive. And, and I think through Linda's tapes and the telling of the story, you show exactly how she did the best she could with what she had and who she was.
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out for me that's been written about the film so far was the Times of London when they reviewed the film. I think it was the Times of London. It was certainly one of the main national newspapers here said, Billie dies at 44, crushed by the things around her. But when you watch the film, you ask yourself, how did she manage to survive so long? And I think that's a really salient point.
Yes, very much so.
Poster. Somebody wants to buy the poster. Nash Johnson, Q. Is there a way to purchase the movie poster? Yes, there will be a way to buy the movie poster, probably on the Billie Holiday site, but we haven't got around to distributing those. But actually, a lot of people. In fact, actually, what my first Q&A I did on the film this autumn was in France, and the second question was about the poster, and the French in a very kind of French way, then spent 10 minutes discussing poster design and how it stood out, and it's the only time in my life where I've ever had a Q&A where somebody's asked about the posters. So yeah, I do think it's beautiful. It was come up by a designer in the UK here, and I think it's it's arresting and powerful, and
so they'll be able to get through the movie websites, but also billieholiday.com when it's available. The poster will be on billieholiday.com. And then also there's a couple other questions. Did you see Gabriel from YouTube says it says huge Billie fan, have her face tattooed on my back, read books, saw documentaries, collect her music. Fantastic job. How has Billie influenced you now? Do you want to start with that, and then I'll say?
Wow, I just want to know. I want to see that tattoo. I wish we.
So do I. So I would ask that if Gabriel somehow could send their contact information to 92Y, we'd love to see the tattoo and possibly post it on Billie's socials.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll send Gabrielle
on billieholiday.com or on her socials. We do Fan Art Fridays. Just so people know, we do Fan Art Fridays usually on her Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And then there are a slew of Billie Holiday tattoos through fans. So we've highlighted actually some of those, and some of the work has been absolutely gorgeous. So we'd love to see her face tattooed on your back, Gabriel.
And answer to your question about how has Billie influenced me, and I'm sure Michelle's going to have a much better answer than me. You'll just witter on about film stuff. But actually, the thing that actually I think Billie's most influenced me now, right in this current moment, not throughout, is actually the anger that I feel, and I probably because of talking a lot about Billie and, and seeing the circumstances of the world and the political situation, I just feel really angry. I feel, when I see this incredible artist who had so much to give and the things that crushed her, I'm full of, admiration and like overwhelmed by how amazing she is. But at the same time, it makes me just feel angry that, that the same you know, that she is crushed, and so many people have been crushed and they continue to be crushed and are given labels, you know, and you know, not allowed to exist freely. And that, you know, 60 years after Billie Holiday's death, we're having the same conversation, and she gets to be one of the greatest of all time, and she's still crushed. So what's it like for everybody else who doesn't have that gift that allows them to rise above? You know, that's what I feel.
And to go a little bit further for how I feel, and as you mentioned, you're from the UK. I am actually originally from Canada, and how she's influenced me and what does she mean? To go even further, she's an icon. She's not just a Black icon. We love to put people in boxes. What she means to me and how she's influenced me is she spoke her truth. People didn't want to hear her truth. So as a result, they put her in the boxes, or they try to squelch her fire. And 61 years plus after her death, her fire and flame has not been put out, because she stands for what she stood for then when she was alive. She just wanted people to be recognized for who they are and to be treated as humans, like everybody. And what this film, and I knew this before this film, but when you are a artist, or not even an artist, just a human being who wants the respect and deserves the respect and equal treatment to everybody else, for her to have to go buy hamburgers or extra food because she didn't know if she would be able to get food or basic sustenance later on, because she was the only Black person in an all-white band, and when they could go to hotels and sleep, and she might have to sleep on the bus, or she may not know where she would sleep that night, or she'd have to go sleep somewhere else, and you have to go through the back door, and everybody else goes through the front door, and you are treated less than when you are equal to. Though that's how she's influenced me, because the story doesn't change. We're in 2020 and we're still fighting for civil rights and social justice.
And the rights of women and the rights of gay people.
Right, the rights for gay people, the rights for women. And the story hasn't changed. You know, the people have changed. And yes, there have been strides that have been achieved, but realistically, people just want to be considered equal and fully human in all eyes. And that is how she continues to influence me, because she stood firm and she did not waver even through her death. And I think that's important to note.
Wow, powerful stuff, Michele.
They asked the question. They might not have been ready for the answer.
I agree. It's shocking. I was reading a piece last night in the London Review of Books about, you know, what Hannah Arendt had written in the 1960s about these, you know, the institutional power structures and suppression on racial grounds and other grounds, you know, and it's terrifying, you know, it's terrifying the common discourse that allows people to continue to, you know, label people, you know, and thereby labeling them, move them off their entitlements, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, you know, disability, you know, I find it heartbreaking is what I find it, you know, I find it heartbreaking. So do I,
to still be in this, in today's world, but change is coming and we are the change. So, you know, and I think
I didn't vote Democrat because I don't get a vote. So there you go.
Well, we're not going to go to politics, but, you know, I just really appreciate the film, and I appreciate that we've been able to work together on this. And I don't know if there's any other questions that anybody has, or anything you want to mention before we kind of wrap this up.
I just think the influence today as a on culture and music, you know. I think I just want to just talk briefly to that one, which is for Mido, which is in what aspects of culture, music, or otherwise do you see Billie's influence most today? And this is to relate an anecdote from a conversation I had the other day with a British artist called Kareem Bailey Ray, I think, who had a Grammy win or Grammy nomination a few years back, you know. And she said growing up in Leeds as a Black British woman, you know, she was exposed to a lot of music in her house, but it was all people who could really sing, belt it out in a very classical form. And she said then she heard Billie Holiday and she realized that she too could sing, that she did not need to mimic formal structures, that she could find her way with her own voice. And I think lots of artists would say that. I think that's when they come to Billie, they come to someone who is singing the truth, you know, singing their truth, you know. And I think we see that across all music forms today, you know, that the most successful, you know, musicians and the musicians that thrive and survive, you know, are singing their truth. And I think that's what one of the biggest influence of Billie. Yeah, she sang the truth and she paid the price for it, but she sang the truth because that was the only thing that was worth singing about in the first place, you know. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Here's a couple interesting ones. We have Mindy Herman's YouTube, which is her husband. Earl said, Eric. Okay, let me read this. I'm writing through my wife's account. I'm Earl.
Earl Zaden's.
Yes. Son, Eric. Lady spent a lot of time in our apartment on West 86 and sang me lullabies. She passed away when I was 2. I mean, to have firsthand, that's amazing.
Yeah, you got your own performances, and you.
I know.
That's extraordinary. And Earl was such an important figure in her later life. And, you know, I mean, obviously he's in the tapes and stuff, but, you know, he's, you know, someone that tried to sort of protect Billie, I think, you know. But it's amazing that you have that connection. I mean, it's interesting when that happens. I mean, there's some of the photos I love most, which would resonate with that story, are taken by the photographer Jerry Danzig, and they're the ones later in the film where we see Billie holding a child, and you see the emotion that's captured by Jerry Danzig in those photos. This is extraordinary, and you see a completely different side of Lady than you see when she's on stage. She's completely, you know.
And his son Grayson has a Billie Holiday exhibit as well going on right now. So of the photos that
which is worth seeing. And actually, if you hunt out the New Yorker article, where some of those photos were only published in 2015, first of all, and New Yorker ran a big piece by Zadie Smith, and it's a great piece, and the photos are sensational. And, you know, part of the film was discovering new stuff as well. I mean, we did a call out, you know, to try and find new photos of Lady, and Cheyenne Brown, who was my co-producer, worked tirelessly to track down people and their children and their children's children to find who'd been taking photos of Billie. And, you know, there's a few photos that appear very late, which we colorized, which were by Melvin Levine. And we think that they're from her last ever actual stage performance, you know, and they're 3 photos. They're quite blurry, but we use them when we're talking about her trying to get the divorce from Louis. And yeah, as far as we know, they are from the final stage performance ever, which had never been seen before. So there's lots of images that have not been widely publicized that we really wanted to present. But, you know, but certainly there's ones of Jerry Danzig, you know, get me every time.
I will say that in my role at Concord, and to oversee the estates and you know, and Stax Records, to see the legacy. You know, when you hear stories like you just shared about photos come in, it's so important that these are their stories. We consider it history, but these are their lives. And to be protectors of history or legacy is so important so that it is not lost. And then there's also a comment from Dee at YouTube. She says, I was watching Billie Holiday at Carnegie Hall and saw my mother in the audience. I didn't get to see that until my mother had passed, although I did know she was a huge fan. I think to get these firsthand reactions are amazing.
Yeah.
And speaks to the power of film, speaks to the power of your film, speaks to the power of Billie Holiday.
Somebody's asked here, Nina's asked, how many films did Billie Holiday appear in? So as far as I know, the only major feature film she appeared in was New Orleans, which we have the clips of in the movie. Mm-hmm. She was apparently in a film called The Emperor Jones, which was a Paul Robeson film in the background. It's never really been thoroughly verified. She appeared in their short films, which was the where she sings A Saddest Tale, which is a Duke Ellington short, and also in the short Where We Took Now or Never from, which was a musical short with Sugar Chili Robinson, I believe, a little kid that played the piano.
There's quite a few questions or about whether or not there will be we will create a book from the colorization, which is interesting. So I just wanted to let you, I'm sure you saw those questions as well. Nothing
at
this moment.
Not yet at this moment, although it's something that we all sort of look at down the line. Certainly, maybe we'll publish some of the prints, maybe we're talking about doing a limited run of prints with Marina, because I think they're really special photos, and when you see them blown up, they're more than just they are, the amount of restoration that Marina does, they're worthy of, a large image, but we haven't quite decided on that yet, but
Well, I think we've probably pretty much covered it. Anything else any questions you think we missed, or?
My daughter's question about when I'm going to give her a kiss because she wants to go to bed. I think I have to answer that question. Yeah, that's probably the next one to do. But
Well, I'd like to say, it's been a pleasure working with you, James, and been so wonderful working. I think that your team, our team with Sophia Dilly at Concord, the whole Concord team, even the Verve UME team and the soundtrack. I just think Greenwich, 92Y, thank you so much for today.
No, I'd say tell your friends to watch the movie if you enjoyed it. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and tell your friends about it, because we rely on you. Actually, we really rely on your support. And thank you for coming to this early in the process. And thank you for the time that you'll spend afterwards thinking about Billie.
And hopefully the time how it changes each one of us a little bit for the better.
Thank you. Okay. I think